I see there are a lot of familiar faces here, so I apologize in advance if for those of you who have already know most of this, but there are some new developments that you'll find out about. So thanks again for coming. So when we go to the next slide. Okay, so it'd be great if people can introduce themselves just in the chat, just to let us know. We see your names, but know your name and your campus and your department would be helpful. And then throughout the presentation, if you want to ask any questions in the chat, we'll be monitoring it and try to answer them there. We find that Zoom Q&As don't work because nobody actually wants to ask questions on Zoom. So we'll have some time for questions, but we'll also expect that a lot of it will happen in the chat. There's also the email address for nikta at berkeley.edu. If you have any follow-up questions you want to ask or want to get involved, we'll share the deck with anyone who's interested afterwards. And again, what we're trying to do here is introduce CPL, explain how you can work with us, provide an overview of what we are, and hopefully give you enough information that will encourage you that you want to join us and join our network of affiliates. Okay, next slide. I'm going to lead us off talking about CPL a bit, and then we'll go through some of the new data sets we've been putting together and the particular opportunities, the resources we provide for affiliates. We're going to spend a little time at the end talking through a few example projects that have been going on with the lab, and just to give you a sense of what people are doing with the data we put together, and then we'll wrap up and give time for questions. Okay, great. So what is CPL? CPL is a lab that was started about 7 years ago with sites at Berkeley and UCLA, where the goal is to provide research insights using the expertise that the University of California has to impact government in California, to help government work better. We develop and maintain partnerships with government agencies at both the state and county and local levels. And within those partnerships, we do the kinds of research that you all like to do. We work across issue silos, across a lot of social policy domains. And as part of that, we build the infrastructure needed to be able to use the data we need to do those projects. And that both helps the agencies and improves research. I mentioned that our two sites, our primary sites where our staff are located, are at Berkeley and UCLA, but we also have affiliates and projects going at all the other UC campuses. Next slide. Okay, so our team, this is not our whole team, this is a subset of our team that's here. We've shown you our leadership. I mentioned I'm the faculty director of our Berkeley site. My counterpart is Till Van Wachter at UCLA. And then we have executive directors at both sites, Janie Roundtree and Evan White. You'll hear from both of them today. And then we've got research directors and a range of research staff who help maintain the relationships with the agencies we work with and do some of the projects with the agencies. They're not all shown here, but people you'll hear from today are Joanna Leco, the research director at Berkeley, Molly Picard, a research manager at Berkeley, Nikta Akavan, another research manager at Berkeley, and Erica Brown, a researcher here at Berkeley. Okay, next slide. So going to a little more of what we do here at CPL, and I apologize for the dog barking if you can hear that. We develop partnerships with government agencies in California. We do research with them that both adopts the rigorous standards that we all care about, but also really answers the questions that the agencies care about and helps them run their programs better to serve Californians better. A lot of our projects involve connecting across siloed issue areas. In California, a lot of programs are run by very specific agencies that don't have a lot of breadth, and they can access their own data, but they can't always access data from other agencies that work on related areas. And one of the things we can bring is the ability to connect across those areas. When we develop partnerships with agencies, we develop data sharing agreements or data use agreements. And as part of those, we obtain access to data for the projects we're doing. We do a lot of work to clean it and link it and analyze it. And we preserve those linkages so that they're useful for other projects as well. That enables us to develop kind of long-term research agendas with the partners and really collaborate with them on helping them figure out what questions can the data help them answer, and how can we help them. We do a lot of connecting of our partners with other resources that we may know about with members of our faculty affiliate network to help them identify the expertise they need. And then a big part of our goal is that we use all these partnerships to develop infrastructure that will last. As many of you know, if you try to, as an individual faculty member, if you try to do a project with a government agency, that will typically involve, as a first step, you agree on a project. And as a next step, you wait 2 years while a data use agreement gets established. And then you have to figure out how you're going to store the data and all of that. We've tried to build that infrastructure as a one-time fixed cost and then make it available to agencies and researchers throughout the state with the hope that the fixed cost doesn't have to be paid more than once, and that enables a lot more research to happen. Okay, next slide. So our funding model, again, a big part of what we do is creating infrastructure for accessing and storing administrative data. That then once that data is stored, it can be used for projects that our partners initiate, for projects that we initiate, that we suggest to the partners, and we say, hey, this would be really useful for you, and also for hosted projects initiated by external PIs. All of the projects have to be approved by the partners. They always own the data. But it's a lot easier for a partner to approve a project if all the infrastructure is already in place and they don't have to spend 2 years negotiating a data use agreement before the project can start. To fund all of this, we've been fortunate to get a number of general operating support grants. The Arnold Ventures was our first big grant and got the lab started. We've also gotten substantial grants from the National Science Foundation, from the Irvine Foundation, from the UC Office of the President, to help build the infrastructure that enables the lab to run. Once we have that infrastructure built, we can then pursue project grants. It's very hard we're doing lots of interesting projects with the data we have. It's very hard to go to a foundation and say, give me a grant for this project. I'm not sure if it'll happen because we'll have to get the data in place first. But if we ever do, then it's going to be a really great project. It's much easier to go to them and say, we already have the data in place. We already have a data use agreement. We've cleaned the data. Here's the project. And here's the timeline we can do it on. And we found that having this baseline set up makes it much more feasible to pursue those kinds of project grants. So we've been able to get a number of project grants to support the projects of types A and B. And as part of those, we're often able to build in funding to develop linkages, which are quite time intensive to create. And once 2 data sets are linked, we hold on to that crosswalk and we can use it for other hosted projects. When it comes to projects of type C, hosted projects, we have to figure out how to cover those costs. We try to cover the marginal costs of those through per project fees to users. The marginal costs aren't all that large relative to the fixed costs. And so we think this is a pretty attractive way of doing this kind of a project, but we do have to somehow cover those marginal costs. We have pursued grant funding. We have some grant funding from Office of the President now. We've pursued other funding to support those fees for projects where we can, and we have a Sea Grant program that can support those fees. But again, they're fairly modest as these things go. Next slide. Part of our idea with the lab is to work across social policy areas. Again, I mentioned that these agencies tend to be pretty siloed. They tend to only see their own domain. But we know that the kinds of problems that we all work on span traditional government agency domains. And so we've identified 6 social policy domains that kind of cover the kinds of projects we work on. Criminal justice and public safety, homelessness and high needs populations, labor and employment, social safety net, education, and health. Health is relatively new for us. We didn't have that as part of our list at first. And so we developed partnerships with agencies in all of these areas, and we have projects going with all of them. And again, many of the projects span these areas, and so allow us to understand what's the relationship between having a job and likelihood of becoming homeless, for example, or between criminal justice outcomes and later safety net participation. I've been working for the last couple of years on a big project on understanding how college students at the University of California use social safety net benefits. Those are the kinds of things that you really can't do with the traditional government structure where each agency only has its own variables. Next slide. So I mentioned we've developed partnerships with a number of different agencies. There are many, many agencies in California that work on even these six policy areas. We've done our best to kind of develop partnerships with the biggest ones, but there are certainly some that you're going to be interested in that we haven't worked with yet, and we'd love to talk about how to expand to them. But we have partnerships in place with over 10 state level agencies covering social services, taxes, employment, corrections, higher education, financial aid. We have partnerships with several different local justice system agencies, 2 county CEOs, 3 cities. We're working with a consortium of 40 or more school districts based in Santa Clara County. We also have a initiative with the LA County Homelessness consortium of about 30 organizations that work on homelessness in Los Angeles. That's not all of them, obviously. In particular, I think we don't cover the whole state for programs that operate at the county level, but I think we're interested in expanding to more where feasible. Next slide. So we're going to talk a lot about how it would work for you all to collaborate with us or to work on a CPL project. And so I want to talk a little bit about what that looks like. There are usually 2 ways that a project starts. The most common one is that people like you come to us and propose a project that you'd like to do, and we connect you with our agency partners. And we work with you to develop a proposal that the agency will understand. We take it to the agencies. We say, look, we've got this established process. Here's a project that somebody would like to do. Are you interested in pursuing it? And if they say yes, then we go on to the next stage. Sometimes many of you have your own relationships with our agency partners. And so sometimes these projects come with, you already proposed a project to the agency. They already said they're interested. And then you come to us and say, look, you guys have already worked out all these logistics. Can we use that? And that's great. The other type of project starts when the partners come to us and say, hey, we've got this problem. And we say, wow, that seems like an important problem, but we don't have the capacity or the expertise to be able to do that project. And then we go out to our network and we try to find people in our network who might be able to do that. And so, we're gradually building out the network so that we can do a better job of answering questions that come to us from our partners. Once a project is agreed upon between the researcher and the partner, then we have to develop a slightly longer project description. We add an amendment to our data use agreements. And our data use agreements are set up to make it really easy to add projects as amendments. There's a master agreement that covers all of the things that are really hard, that we don't really care that much about, but that end up taking months to negotiate. Things like who indemnifies who about data breaches. And then once those are signed, the amendments just cover what the substance of the projects, the data that will be used, and the users. And often those don't have to go back to the lawyers to sign, and so they can be executed much more quickly. Once the partner and the university signed off on the DUA, you get to do the research. We have a secure data hub, a VPN-based computer system that you can connect to and do the work. And then once you've done that, you write the paper and you give a report to the partner, depending on what the outcome looks like. We mostly leave that work to you, but we do have the ability to support with some aspects of the project. We can support some with IRB work. We've had to spend a lot of time developing expertise on what goes to the state IRB, what goes to campus IRBs, how to talk about this kind of work. We can do some work. We can do some help with fundraising run projects, with quality assurance. We've developed a quality control process for our internal projects that we can sometimes make available to outside researchers. We have a communications capacity for projects that have some public interest. We can help with data linkages. A lot of projects involve linkages across data systems, and we've developed new techniques for linking data without either agency being willing to share personally identifiable information with us. And then we can also help sometimes with data documentation for data sets that we've worked with before. Okay, with that, let me turn it over to Evan White, who's going to lead us off in talking through some of the data opportunities that we have.
Great, thanks, Jesse, and great to see so many friendly faces out there. the first data opportunity I want to talk about is our most popular one, which is the UC Consumer Credit Panel. So you can go to the next slide. The UCCCP, as we sometimes call it, is a data set of anonymized consumer credit information from one of the 3 major credit bureaus. So this is one of a handful of consumer credit panels that exist around the country. For various reasons, I think ours is the best, but you can judge for yourself. We have a 2% sample of the nation, and we have a 100% sample of California. And not only do we get, for the national sample, the sort of primary records and the 2% sample, but we also get everybody who lives with those 2% and anybody who shares an account, a loan, or what's called a trade line in the data with those people. So if you are an authorized user on their credit card, or if you're a co-signer on their student loan, or if you're a joint borrower on their mortgage. So that covers over 60 million US residents. We get the data, sort of repeated cross sections of the data from 2004 to present on a quarterly basis. And we did get monthly data during 2020 just because we felt like for various COVID-related projects that would be useful. The data are very rich. For those who've worked with them, they can attest that we get sort of loan level information about sort of for each loan, what the type of loan is, what the balance of the loan is, what the payment history was, and whether someone's paying on time. In addition, we get information about the individual. We get a household ID, so we can group together people in households. We get some demographics of varying reliability, although things like age are very good. And then we get their location as well, down to a census block level, and zip code as well. So very rich data. And we are also, this may be news for some of the participants who are using the UCCCP. We are working with the Bureau to get race and ethnicity estimates using the BISG method, Bayesian Improved Surname and Geography. So if you're a current user, we'll be sending an email about this sometime soon, but that's an exciting development as well. We also have the ability to link these data at the individual level with other data sets. And the Credit Bureau has agreed to a process for doing that. As long as the other data set has some sort of PII that we can use. We don't use it in clear text. We use this hash linkage methodology that Jesse referenced earlier, where both data owners will encrypt the data in the same fashion, and we link the encrypted versions of the PII. So as long as that other data set has name or address, or dates of birth, social security numbers, we can do an individual level linkage. So that's very exciting as well. And we have done a few of those already and have several more in the queue. I will say, some of you on the call have experienced this, that linkage queue has gotten to be quite long in terms of the time that it's taken to do those. We're hoping that the process for doing those speeds up soon, and there's some indications that it will. So we hope to clear the queue sometime next year, and then be able to process those on a more expedient basis. You can go to the next slide, Nita. So we have over 100 current and former projects using the data. Some of them focus on consumer finance and the lending patterns and financial well-being, things like that. Others focus on things like residential mobility, because you're able to see where people move in the data on a pretty frequent basis. We think it's the best data set out there for tracking sort of close to real time residential mobility. And then there's also folks who have done projects on everything from extreme heat and wildfires to lending market concentration. So tons of projects going on there. It's actually a great community of folks. We have a tremendous data documentation system and a lot of just sort of historical knowledge about using the data that I think is part of what you're getting when you cover these project fees that are listed below. So like Jesse said, we do charge a fee for access, which is much less than the cost of purchasing these data, of course. It's around $7,000 a project, and to do those individual level linkages, it's about $13,000. But we do have a Seed grant program, which we'll talk about later, that can help to cover some of the access fees. Everybody at University of California can use the data, but in addition, non-UC co-authors are eligible to use the data as well, as long as they have a UC co-author. So use that link for applying. And it looks like maybe we are on the next slide. Okay, great. So the next data opportunity is the Health Data Access Initiative, which we sometimes call HDI. This is an effort to make it more affordable for folks all over UC to access Medicaid and Medicare data from CMS. So these are federal data that are often very expensive to purchase. A single project could cost, upwards of $50,000 or even $100,000. So what we do is we sort of match dollar for dollar any qualifying purchase, which just means it has to sort of fit certain criteria that we have around which data sets are going to be useful for HDI. And then those data can be reused for a low project fee. So that's sort of the concept here. We're at the beginning stages of building this out. So we have some data on board right now, some Medicaid data in particular, that it's available for reuse. And we have some projects in motion that would bring on more data sets that would be available for reuse. Anyone on the call who's looking to purchase Medicare and Medicaid data from CMS, we would invite you to do it through HDI, because then it makes it available to everyone around UC for these low fees, which to me is really important because it allows people like graduate students to do research using data that they normally wouldn't be able to access without like an NIH grant. So that is the Health Data Access Initiative, and I will pass it over to Janie to talk about the Research Accelerator.
Hi, I'm Janie Rountree. I'm the Executive Director of our site at UCLA. Our mission at the California Policy Lab is to do work that translates to better policy on urgent issues. So it won't just surprise you all to know that we do a lot of work on homelessness in California. This particular project makes available a data set of de-identified homelessness data for the Los Angeles County and several continuum of care down here. It's by far the largest homeless population in the country. There are a couple of things to know about this data set. First of all, it contains de-identified data. So there is no PII available. So it's difficult or impossible to link this particular data set to other data sets. It does cover the years 2010 to 2022. It has very detailed HMIS data on services, client demographics, triage tool assessment scores, if that's of interest. The allowable users of the data are members of the Homelessness Policy Research Institute, which is a research institute based at USC that CPL co-chairs. And let me just encourage you that if this data set's of interest, becoming a member of HPRI is very simple. It just requires emailing the program administrators, which we can help you do. And that will give you access to colleagues who are interested in similar issues, as well as a seminar series. Once you're a member of HPRI, you apply to use the Research Accelerator data set, and the data owner, which is the Los Angeles Homeless Services Authority, will review your project. And then once that project is approved, we give you access to the data, which includes pre-processed data, code books, wiki, access to our knowledge of policy history that you might be seeing in the data. There's a Slack channel for users. This address, Research Accelerator at capolicylab.org, is your one-stop shop for information about the data, the application process, becoming a member of HPRI, what is and is not in the data. So we just encourage you to use that email address if you're interested in this and have any follow-up questions. Thanks, Evan.
everybody. So I'll be talking about our partnership with the Los Angeles District Attorney's Office. This is a very exciting new partnership that we have at CPL. We just signed the data use agreement like a few weeks ago. So truly very exciting and new. Oh, this slide is the wrong slide. Okay, back to the correct slide. So the data so we don't have the data quite yet. So we are working on, since again, the DUA was just signed, the ink is still wet. We are waiting to receive their first extract of the data. Hopefully, we were told definitely by the end of the calendar year, but sometime in the next couple months. But the data will include information related to the investigation and prosecution of all crimes in the county, which includes records on arrest, booking, charges filed, case dispositions, hearings, and court information, sentencing, and demographics. This is a de-identified and anonymized data set. We are hoping to eventually, at some point down the line, have a fully identified data set that we will be able to share with folks who are interested. But as of currently, this is a totally de-identified data set, so not easily linked to other data as it currently stands. The data also includes all records for individuals who have been arrested or charged with a criminal offense in LA from 1996 to present. We'll be getting quarterly updates to that data once we start receiving it, hopefully by, again, the end of this calendar year. And yeah, we're very excited for this partnership. So you can feel free to already apply or think about ideas and soon apply. Applications are going to be reviewed quarterly, and as with all of our other data, the district attorney's office has the final say on review of any of the projects. But yeah, we, again, with like data dictionaries and information about the data, we will have that a little bit further down the line. Again, this is all very new, but any other information or questions you have, feel free to reach out.
Hi, everyone. My name is Nikta. I am going to be talking about the two of our data sets called this first one is the safety net data set, part of our Pearly project. It is made up of its data on California's safety net services. So everyone who is in CalFresh and CalWorks is included in this data. It includes records on enrollment, earnings data, issuance amounts, and demographic data. It's made up of 7 component data sets. Each data set includes at least 10 years of data, but the years available vary depending. So for example, our CalWorks earnings data begins in 1993. The issuance amounts begin in 2010. All the data is anonymized and can be linked at the individual level. We have an application page online. You'll see linked here. CPL staff review applications quarterly, and then we pass on high quality applications to CDSS, and CDSS has the final say on which projects are approved. And access is free to the approved researcher. And our second Pearly data set is the life course data set. It is pulls data from several Sonoma County agencies and includes interactions between residents who are over age 18 and several county agencies, including health, housing, human services. And so this allows researchers to do research across policy domains, and it's really part of Sonoma County's goal of having a more coordinated approach to their service delivery to improve outcomes. And so the hope is that by making this data set available to researchers, that there will be able to be really quality research that informs policy solutions for the county. And so this application is also available online, and CPL staff review applications quarterly and then pass on strong applications to the county, and all of the county agency heads review and have the final say. I'm going to pass it on to Evan.
Great, I'm back. So we have another data opportunity for those interested in doing research with school districts. So the Data Zone, great name, is a organization that brings together data from over 40 school districts in San Mateo and Santa Clara counties. There are a couple of other California counties there, but it's mostly San Mateo and Santa Clara. And those counties keep all of their SIS data in the Data Zone. So things like attendance, enrollment, discipline, academics. And the lovely part about this is that if you're interested in doing a project that goes across several school districts, we have a process in place by which you can suggest a project that goes out to all the school districts and gives them an opportunity to opt in. And then, you know, if 7 school districts opt in, their data is made available to you on the Data Zone. So the data is already in one place, and you only need to really sign one project data use agreement as opposed to 7 across different school districts. So kind of a nice thing if you're interested in doing some cross district projects. And the email is there if you have any questions. And I think that rounds out our set of data opportunities. These are sort of the most public ones that we have like open applications for and open processes for. I will say that we get a lot of in-reach from folks like yourselves who just sort of are doing data discovery, right? Want to do a project that uses California data, understand that probably the California Policy Lab has the broadest understanding of all the data sets that are in the state. I wouldn't suggest that we have the deepest understanding on any one of them, but I think we work across more data sets and agencies than anybody else. So feel free to reach out just if you have questions. I got one yesterday about, DMV data, and one the day before about franchise tax board data. So, feel free to reach out. We try and point people in the right direction. And right now we're going to do a quick poll just to see if there's anybody, to see what data set that we've mentioned that you might be interested in. So Nikta, I think you have that one up there. We don't have a not applicable option, but feel free to just not respond if you aren't interested in any of these. But this helps us understand where we should be focusing our efforts. And I will then pass this along to Erica, who's going to talk through some of our funding opportunities.
Hi, everyone. As Evan mentioned, I'm going to be talking about a few of our funding opportunities for external researchers, which are provided by the UC Office of the President Multi-Campus Research Programs and Initiative Grant, which is a mouthful. The first one up is our graduate fellowship program, which supports UC master's and doctoral students interested in policy relevant research topics. We provide grant funding for folks to carry out projects that leverage CPL, all good, or other California-based administrative data sets. Grad students may apply themselves, and faculty may also apply on behalf of a graduate student. The fellowship grant is typically a $10,000 stipend. Grad students can receive up to 2 to support long-term work on the same project. We use several criteria for selecting projects, including cross-campus and interdisciplinary research and their potential for policy impact. We've provided about 32 of these awards to date, and a few past projects include examinations of natural disaster-related credit shocks using the UCCP, disparities of Latinos and Latinas in community supervision using county probation data, and the impacts of expansions in pre-K access and school funding on student success using data from the California Departments of Education and Social Services, First 5 California, and the Office of Civil Rights. Applications are accepted at the end of each quarter, and the next deadline is December 31st. Next slide, please. Thank you. We've also developed a seed grant program to support both UC students and faculty with research proposals that leverage CPL datasets, including the UC CCP, HDI, and PERLI datasets. These awards are designed to cover data access fees, data reuse fees, and other infrastructure costs for teams with valuable research ideas, but don't necessarily have access to other funding to cover these expenses. Grants typically range from about $5,000 to $19,000, and costs will vary based on the project specifications. As Evan mentioned earlier, seed grants for the HDI are designed as matching grants for the purchase of CMS data and can range into tens of thousands of dollars, whereas a seed grant for the UCCP is around $7,000. Grants may not be used to pay a salary or stipend or to cover university fees and must be spent within the calendar year they're granted. And we've distributed 10 of these awards to date. The application deadlines are the same as they are for the fellowship grant, and the next one coming up is December 31st. I just also wanted to note that exceptional grad student projects may be awarded both a grad fellowship and seed grant, depending on our funding availability. And next slide, please. This is more of a combination of funding and additional research opportunities, but to support undergraduate students interested in policy research, we created our Summer Institute. So since 2021, we've hosted around 10 undergraduate students in the summer months to work on data-focused policy research projects and to also hone their statistical skills. The Institute lasts about 10 weeks, and students receive a $3,000 stipend to help offset their cost of living. If you know of an undergraduate student with a background in data science, economics, statistics, or public policy, and with some experience in coding and data analysis, you can encourage them to apply for next summer's institute. Those applications will open up in March. This past summer, we had about 12 students from all 9 UC campuses conducting research using the UCCP, and their research focused on medical debt, financial distress, intergenerational links in household finance, student loan debt repayment, and so-called credit invisibles. And with that, I will pass off to Joanna.
Great, thank you so much, Erica. So I am going to be talking about all of the resources that we have available for you to take advantage of if you feel that they'd be helpful. So I'll talk about data discovery tools, IRB resources, and a bit about our hashed linkage toolkit. Can you go to the next slide? All right, so one of the first places you can look if you're interested in doing research with administrative data in California is our webpage, where we actually have a roadmap of individual level administrative data that exists in California that we know about, and we'll keep this up to date to the best of our ability. These aren't necessarily data sets that we have on hand at CPL. Several of these agencies have their own research application processes that are well developed that they prefer you use, but we tried to bring together all of the information that we are aware of about the ways in which you can access these data in California. So you should definitely check out that webpage if you're interested in any of those data sets. Next slide, please. For data that we hold at CPL, we have a data wiki. This provides some pretty high-level documentation for the data that we have organized by each agency partner that we work with. So that includes the type of data that we have, the other data sets that we've linked those data to, and who the point of contact is on our staff who has the most knowledge about that data set, who can answer questions. So if you're interested in working with one of the data sets that we have at CPL, you can email the email address there. We can set you up with a login to the data wiki, and you can learn more about what we have. Great. So as was mentioned before, most researchers doing research with our data need to get clearance from the IRB for their project. We've developed a lot of internal guidance for our projects about how to develop an IRB application. And we've created a version of that guidance that we want to make available to researchers, particularly those who are using our data infrastructure. So this guidance can help you with a couple things. It can help you figure out what IRB you should be applying to in the first place, whether it's a state IRB or a campus IRB. Often now, if you're using any state level data, you need to apply for IRB clearance from the state IRB. And the other types of resources we've developed include timelines for how long that IRB clearance process should take. So if you're writing a grant proposal, or if you're trying to think about when you'll have access to data, it's a helpful tool to use. We have some tips for speeding up that process. We have some templates, and then we have some stock language, particularly around our data infrastructure and data security processes. So if you're using those, if you're using data on our infrastructure, it's really helpful to use the data we've developed to answer those specific questions. So happy to share those resources with anyone who's interested. Here's just an example of the decision tree, which can help you figure out what type of IRB application you need to submit for your given project. Great. And then the last resource I'll mention today is our hash linkage toolkit. So in the process of developing several hash linked data sets for our own research, we've developed kind of an overarching guidance and approach to conducting hash linkages. And as both Jesse and Evan mentioned when they were speaking, the hash linkage process is a privacy preserving linkage approach that allows us to link records from administrative records from two different agencies without ever personally viewing the personally identifiable information from either of those sources. So it's a very secure way to link data sets, particularly between agencies who don't feel that they can share PII with us or with each other. So the hash linkage toolkit, which is available at that link, has a bunch of different resources for how to approach a hash linkage, how to talk to agencies about the process, the kind of roles of all the people participating in the process, and some lessons learned from us. There's also all of our code that we've developed, kind of generalizable code for both hashing and linkage, is available on GitHub. We are constantly iterating on this as we learn more and improve our process. So this entire thing is living and growing and kind of improving as we go. So if this is something that you're interested in doing, or you're interested in doing a hash linkage with CPL data, or you just want to use the resources to do another linkage on your own, please reach out if you have any questions, or particularly if you use the code and have questions or comments or improvements that you want to suggest. We'd love to hear from you.
So now we have a few lightning talks from researchers who are using different data sets that we've talked about here. So I'm going to introduce our first presenter is Nicole Perales.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I am Nicole, and I am an economist at the Census Bureau right now. But before that, I was a PhD student at UC Berkeley, and I have been affiliated in some capacity with CPL since 2019 through this ongoing research project with the California Department of Social Services. And what this project focuses on is this question of whether higher pay affects performance. And specifically, I'm looking at it in the foster care setting where there are foster homes that receive these monthly payments from the county. And while that's not technically a wage, it functions a lot like one, and you can think about it in that way. But in any setting, whether it's foster care or not, you can imagine higher pay could either attract a different type of worker and or change the performance of the workers that you have. And a lot of the academic and policy debate is really focused on that first bullet here, mostly because the direction of that selection effect is ambiguous. So in foster care setting, for example, there's this especially pervasive fear that higher pay is going to attract providers who are less intrinsically motivated to perform, and that would translate into lower performance or lower quality of care for these kids. So what I do here is I'm leveraging this federal court ruling from 2011 that resulted in an over 20% increase in the monthly payments that goes to these foster homes in California. And what I found is that this pay raise I studied dramatically improved the safety of children while they were in foster care. And importantly, with this really rich data, I can rule out any kind of selection going on. So instead, it has to be that second bullet point we talked about, that there's some kind of change in the effort or investment into these children. If you could go to the next slide. I was able to do all this using 2 decades of really rich microdata from California's Child Welfare Services case management system. This has an incredibly rich variable space that really spans everything that the child welfare system does, from child protective services and investigations to foster care and adoption. And it's really this type and quantity of data that was key to my research design here. So I first used this data to just study descriptively this decade leading up to the policy change that I'm studying. And it highlights this very important fact that foster care labor markets are first segmented, and those segments are very interdependent in a way that the supply of service providers in one segment directly affects the demand for service providers in another. So in my setting, even though one segment is excluded from this big pay raise, there's no true control group. But what this very granular data also allowed me to do was to instead zoom in just on the days and months just before and after this policy was announced. And I could use a regression discontinuity design to look at the very short-term effect of that pay raise on each segment of the market. And when you look at the data that way, that you can only really do with this data, it's fascinating because it's actually that excluded group that was the most responsive to this policy. I could probably keep going for an hour about that finding alone, but instead I want to be able to talk on the next slide about what I see as some of the benefits of working with California Policy Lab through this process, especially for PhD students like I was when I initiated this. And in my opinion, the biggest by far is just the time it saves you. For some context of how I got this project started, I was kind of separately talking to policymakers at CDSS about research in foster care. They told me, you know, you have our full support, but it'll probably be a few years even with that support before you get your hands on any data. And it was about that time that I linked up with CPL and instead was able to just add an attachment to their existing data use agreement with CDSS. And that alone was the difference between me pursuing this data and this research and just abandoning it altogether. I really can't understate how much of a huge difference that makes. And then since then, my data has been securely, or this data for this project has been securely stored with CPL, but I've benefited in a lot more ways than just the storage. They also oversaw the transfer. The secure kind of onboarding of any research assistants working with this data. They were really integral. I forgot till Joanna was just talking about the IRB process, but the IRB process and just preparation for CDSS's internal reviews they do of your results. Just a lot of just practice wisdom about how to make those things go smoothly. It's better for CDSS and it's better for you because in the long run, again, it's just time saved. And also when my data wasn't ready for these results couldn't be shared publicly yet, it was a venue for an internal practice job talk. And the last thing I'll say is that I think it's just kind of just exposure to very nice, smart people it's been a really nice way to learn about kind of every part of the research process above and beyond just coming up with a clever idea. And so I really benefited massively. And if there are any PhD students who want to talk, I'm available too after this. I'll stop there though.
Thank you, Nicole. We have Matt Unrath next.
Morning, everybody. I'm Matt Unrath. I am also an economist at the U.S. Census Bureau, just like Nicole. And I have also been working with CPL for quite a long time. So I'm currently a research fellow with California Policy Lab, and I've had the pleasure of working with the folks at CPL since I think 2017, when I had just finished up my second year of the PhD program at UC Berkeley. And I spent a good portion of my PhD working with the CalFresh and CalWorks data that CPL has received from CDSS. So during my PhD, I wrote a number of papers with that data. And one of those was looking at the effect that periodic verification, eligibility verifications have on retention in the CalFresh program. So that those paperwork burdens push a lot of eligible households off of CalFresh, again, despite their ongoing eligibility. So a follow-up project that I've pursued is to try to test how to make that process a little bit easier for folks and try to help eligible households stay enrolled in SNAP in California. So I partnered with Code for America. It's a nonprofit that operates Get CalFresh, which is a digital platform that helps individuals and families apply for CalFresh a little bit more easily. And they have another element of their digital platform is the opportunity to submit a 6-month review. After you successfully enroll in the program, you have to demonstrate that you're still eligible 6 months later. And they we piloted in 2021 a new feature of that application in which cases could have information from their original application pre-filled in that recertification form. So they didn't have to retype their name, their kids' names, their contact information, where they lived, all of that information. They didn't have to go through this long process of retyping. All of that was ported over from their initial application. We piloted that new process in about 7 counties. 10,000 cases were randomly assigned to receive that new form. 10,000 cases were randomly assigned to use their standard form. And then we evaluated the effect that had on the likelihood of submitting that recertification. And so we found that there was a huge effect on likelihood of submission, about an 8 percentage point increase to the likelihood of submitting that, what they call a SAR-7. But the obvious question is, did that have an effect on actual enrollment and retention? And we couldn't answer that with Code for America's data, but we could with the enrollment information that CPL has from CDSS. And so what we did is we piggybacked on an existing hash linkage that CPL had done for another project, in which Code for America's she's asking me if I want to play, which PII from Get CalFresh was hashed in the same way that we hashed PII from CDSS's system, and then we linked all of that data together. And so we could see which cases were offered the opportunity to use that new form versus were assigned to that control group. And then we evaluated whether they actually were enrolled the months after that recertification form was due. And so we unfortunately found that had no effect on enrollment. And so we're continuing to pursue that research. So the next step of the process is to potentially access county level outcomes through CDSS's CalSAWS system, in which we can actually understand which cases actually submitted that recertification form, if they were deemed ineligible, why, if they didn't stay enrolled in CalFresh, was it because there was some element of that recertification form that was filled out improperly? All of that is due to CDSS's longstanding, or CPL's really successful relationship with CDSS. So let me wrap up. So I could not have done any of this work without CPL. So from the navigating the IRB process and the data use agreements with both Code for America and CDSS, couldn't have done that without on my own. Needed CPL to help me with that. The hash linkage is also something that from scratch would have taken me a tremendous amount of time. So we have, to be able to hash CDSS and Code for America's PII in exactly the same way, build a really complicated matching algorithm so that all of those hash values could be connected to each other. Again, really difficult for an individual researcher to do on their own, but I'm piggybacking on a process that CPL makes available to other researchers. And then also just to receive continual updates on enrollment information from CDSS, earnings information that CPL has, thanks to a match between the Employment Development Department and the CDSS data. So now I can test whether this this intervention had greater effects on cases with zero earnings or minimal earnings or maximal earnings, look at eligibility, and see whether that varies with intervention's impact. And then ongoing data access again to the CalSAW system, to receiving additional information from Code for America. Hard to receive all that on my own, and CPL makes that process really easy. So I'll leave it there. Happy to talk more about the project, but strong endorsement for accessing all this data through CPL's system.
Thank you. Now we're going to hear from Amanda Brewster.
Hi, everyone. I'm Amanda Brewster. I'm an assistant professor in health policy and management over at UC Berkeley in the School of Public Health. And I'm going to tell you about what my team and I are doing in collaboration with CPL, why we're so excited about it, and why working with CPL has been so critical to our ability to do this work. So I'm an assistant professor focused on organizational processes that can promote improved healthcare outcomes, with special focus on links across different types of services and focus on populations where we're looking to improve equity. And I'm also associate director of our Center for Healthcare Organizations and Innovation Research at UC Berkeley. So the project that I'm talking about is a little different in that we're looking to create a large shared data resource that some of us at Berkeley and our grad students, and also hopefully folks across the UC system, can take advantage of in the months and years to come. So what we're working on is a study to understand how healthcare delivery organizations influence quality of care for Medicaid beneficiaries. And our initial aims are focused on two types of services, looking at home and community-based services, which are really important for providing long-term services and supports as an alternative to nursing home placement for people who prefer to stay in their homes, even as they manage chronic conditions. And then another set of aims that's focused on understanding the role of physician practices and practice management capabilities and helping patients manage chronic conditions. So both questions that are focused on the organizational level. And what we are looking to do is understand how organizations serve Medicaid beneficiaries differently, how those differences and processes are associated with outcomes, and then also be able to back up and take advantage of variation across states and across state Medicaid policies to understand how those Medicaid policy environments change what's possible for organizations, thereby looking at what's possible to improve outcomes. And I see some folks on the call who I know are well acquainted with Medicaid and health policy, but I'll just take a second to for those who might not be as familiar with Medicaid and health policy. So Medicaid is our critically important public health insurance program, which covers about 90 million Americans with lower incomes. And we in health policy have had lots of great research and important evidence generated from our Medicare claims data. So our other public health insurance program focused on older adults, which has been really a wealth of data and information for research, but there's been much less ability to analyze Medicaid policy and Medicaid experiences because it is a program that's fragmented across all of our states. So it's a state federal partnership. But it's also a really, really important insurance source for some of our priority populations at the younger age spectrum. So Medicaid covers about 40% of births, and also for groups that face health risks associated with lower incomes and exposure to histories of discrimination and racism. So when we think about the level of the provider organization, we also know that Medicaid patients aren't evenly distributed across providers. In fact, they tend to be concentrated. Their care happens within safety net providers that could be health centers, federally qualified health centers, safety net hospitals. So for those of us who are interested in healthcare delivery organizations, interested in equity, the organizations that serve Medicaid beneficiaries are really, really important. we can go to the next slide. So there's a new source of Medicaid data, which is what we're able to work with CPL on. And our collaboration with CPL is really allowing our team to be able to do this work. We really couldn't do it otherwise. And the new source of data is called the TIMSIS, the Transformed Medicaid Statistical Information System analytic files, which have become available to researchers just in the past couple of years. So it's a new set of data. Our field is really kind of getting up to speed on taking advantage of these, and they're huge data sources, which are really expensive. So what we've been able to work with CPL on is a purchase of 1 year of data so far. We've gotten 2018, which will be able to be reused at much, much lower cost by other teams across the UC system in the future. So far we have the demographic and eligibility files, the inpatient files, and the outpatient files, as well as some Medicare hospitalization files for dually eligible beneficiaries. And we could go to the next slide and I'll tell you where we are. So we have really benefited from our collaboration with CPL in a few different ways. First, in negotiating this complex data use agreement with the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. The expertise from CPL was critical for us to be able to do that. The expertise and technical kind of capabilities that CPL has to acquire the data and manage really much larger data sets than our team has worked with in the past has been really critical. We're actively working right now to set up the files in a SQL database structure and to optimize that to allow our programs to run in a reasonable amount of time. And then the possibility of cost saving reuse opportunities is really, really critical for us in the future and for our ability to hopefully collaborate with colleagues across the UC system in the future on this. And I'll leave it there.
Great, thank you. We have our last speaker, which is Oded Goretz.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. So this is a project with a lot of different colleagues. We could just go to the next slide. So long story short, so I began working with the California Student Aid Commission, which is a state agency that holds all of California FAFSAs many years ago. And through that partnership, one of the broader questions we had is about the effects of college attendance, not just on students, but also on their parents and their financial health. And so we've looked at a lot of things like enrollment and graduation rates, but obviously we care about these broader outcomes, especially because of narratives about student debt relief and all the things that we have going on in society. And so what we did in this particular project is take FAFSA data from the California Student Aid Commission and then link it to the UCCP data on credit outcomes like balances and delinquencies in order to say, really basic things like, if I go to college, how much do my student loan balances increase? What are the likelihood of, my delinquencies over the long term, et cetera. And we have a number of projects that are ongoing, but I can give an example of a project here where California offers state aid to students through a program called the Cal Grant. And so what we were trying to see is simply if you give a student grant aid that they don't have to pay back, how does it change both the student's financial health as well as their parents' financial health, not just immediately, but over the long run. So we use a regression discontinuity design based on high school GPA to look at these effects over time. We can go to the next slide. So this is an example of like this is actually we've presented. We don't have a paper that's public yet, but just to kind of give a sense of how we put everything together. So from the Student Aid Commission, what we can observe is something like students' GPA that's used as eligibility for receiving grant aid. And then because we have this FAFSA information that has both the student SSN and if they're a dependent, also the parental SSN, what we did is go through that process that people have described beforehand, where we've hashed these SSNs, and then the Student Aid Commission transferred that data over to UCCP, where we've linked it to things like, for instance, what was your educational loan balances and what's the likelihood of being delinquent on those balances, similar kinds of things. So in this particular case, what we're showing is an example of one result where once your GPA is above 3.0, you cross into that threshold where you receive grant aid, we actually see a pretty large decline in the amount of educational loan balances that parents are taking out on their students' behalf. So this is just an example of one kind of thing that we wouldn't have been able to do without the California Policy Lab, in large part because getting access to the credit data is both time consuming, challenging in terms of privacy agreements, but then also very expensive. So one thing that was noted in the chat was the longitudinal nature, and that shouldn't be undersold. The credit data tends to be relatively cheap in the grand scheme if you're just looking at point in time, but to do it longitudinally, they often charge you a lot of money. And so having this longitudinal data for us, like over like a 17-year period, is actually one of the huge benefits of working with the California Policy Lab. You can actually just go too slow. You can skip this. So, you know, in this work, just to be clear, like observing only the student without observing the whole family unit. When we look at the data, we actually don't see a lot of movement on students' educational loan balances. We see a lot of movement on their parents' loan balances. So it's really given us a new insight to what's going on in the family. We've gotten a lot of grant support. Funding agencies have been really excited about these data and all the new possibilities. So just to say, I think there's just lots and lots of opportunities here. There's the seed grants that they talked about earlier, but I think these can really lead to some pretty large grants to support your work. The CPL said talk about pros and cons. I'm going to echo everything people have said. Like everyone at the CPL is incredibly nice. They've been super supportive, especially because one thing that we dealt with is, as the previous presenter said, the data is really large and running things can take a long time depending on what you're studying. And CPL has been great in terms of getting different software on there, working with us to do optimization and things like that. So I do want to say that it's one of the challenges is working with big data. It's like the blessing and the curse, but CPL has been great in terms of working with us on that. CPL has also done a lot of work to simplify the data. So rather than working with like the raw data that could be really challenging, it's in a much cleaner format, which has been incredibly helpful. And so just, it's been really great overall. So I'll stop there.
Great, thank you to all of our presenters. I'm going to hand it over to Joanna next.
Great. So I'm just going to wrap us up and open things up for questions. So just in summary, how can CPL help you? We're here to help connect you to government partners, give you access to administrative data sets when your projects get approved by our partners. We have our CPL Data Hub, where we figured out all the technical things you need to do your research in a secure way that complies with all of the regulations. We have our data wiki, which has a lot of documentation on the data that we have, and can also just point you to a person if you'd rather talk to a person about it. We can help with funding opportunities, both those that we facilitate and the ones that we'll share out to the whole listserv. We can support your data linkage efforts, including sharing our resources on privacy preserving hashed linkage, and our resources to help you get IRB approval. So we encourage you to stay in touch. We have a quarterly newsletter that we'll send out to this group, and we try to populate that with updates on funding opportunities. We've heard about project ideas. So those ideas that we hear from partners that we don't have the capacity or expertise to do, we try to send those along to see if there's anyone interested, potential collaborations, any relevant legislation or kind of news that's come out. We can also use this as a way to distribute anything you want to share with the group. So if you have announcements or calls for collaborators, please let us know and we can include it in our quarterly newsletter. And always you can email Nikta or any one of us if you want to add them to the group. So I just want to pause and open up a new poll. And the question is simply, do you know of anyone who may benefit from using our resources? And if so, can you give us their contact information so we can add them? So this could be grad students interested in funding, other researchers, the folks you work with, potential collaborators, someone who's, you know that they're doing cool research and maybe they'd be interested in one of our data sets, kind of all of the above. So feel free to drop their name in that poll. And with that, we will open it up for questions. I know a bunch of people have been asking questions in the chat, which is great. There's some that we'll follow up on if you didn't get an answer to your question, but if you do want to unmute and ask right now, please feel free.
While we wait for the onslaught of questions, I just wanted to thank Nicole, Matt, Amanda, and Oded for the presentations. That was fantastic. And I promise we did not pay them to say such nice things about us. But maybe we will afterwards. No, not a promise though. So any questions? Don't everyone jump in at once.
I have a quick question. I'm sorry if my audio is a little bit bad. What is the difference between the seed grant and the graduate fellowship grants?
That's a great question. Erica, you were handling those slides. Do you want to go over that?
Sure, I can take that. A seed grant is intended mostly for data access and reuse fees. It's not intended for salary support or anything that extends beyond the data, whereas the grad fellowship grant is really to support your time and any other miscellaneous costs. It can be used flexibly. We don't check in on it. It's just to help you get your project off the ground.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for that. I
Yeah,
also had a question about like the applications. It says that the deadlines are like noon of these 4 dates. Does that mean that these are applications for the next year, or could you explain the timeline a little bit more?
Yes. So I'm going to miss some details, but the next deadline is going to be December 31st. We likely won't be checking the applications on New Year's Day, but typically we review all the applications and decide who will be awarded a fellowship or seed grant within 4 to 6 weeks. And then we email out the folks who we've designated awards to. And I believe that funding is made available quickly, at least within that semester. But I think maybe Nikta or Evan might be able to answer that better than I can.
Yeah, one thing I would add, it's not really timed to semesters or anything like that. So the graduate fellowship is awarded as a stipend, typically a $10,000 stipend that you just get once we finish. Once we've notified you about the award, we sort of line up the stipend. It doesn't come to you as like a GSR or anything like that. And then the seed grant actually goes to cover costs that you would incur in accessing various CPL data resources. So you don't get those funds, you basically just get free access to the resource. So an example, the most typical is people who are accessing the UCCCP would get a seed grant and it just covers their access fee. Yeah, it's not really synced up to the academic calendar, if that makes sense.
Okay, thank you so much. One last small question. I see that you guys for the graduate fellowship program usually award 10 a year. I was wondering how competitive the process is and usually how many applicants you guys get.
I would say that, I mean, Erica, feel free to jump in. I would say that it's fairly competitive, but not super competitive. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I would guess that we award definitely above 25% of the applicants to the grad fellowship program, and it might be closer to half. But maybe that's wrong and someone can correct me. For seed grants, it's probably even less competitive for seed grants. So they're pretty good funding sources, I would argue. And the other thing I'll mention is the grant that supports those funding sources expires at the end of next year, and we have a lot of money left. So I would imagine them getting less competitive over the coming 12 months. So have that be a word of encouragement for applying for those.
And just to add to that, we don't judge applications like relative to each other. If there are 5 grad fellowship applicants who have incredible projects, we could award funding to all 5 of them. So
So I see we have questions. Yuling, you can go ahead and unmute yourself, and then Philip.
Hi, I'm Yuling Chong, assistant professor from School of Social Welfare. And first, thanks for having this meeting and introduce a lot of great information and resources. And myself currently have a host project with CPL and also benefit a lot. And I'm wondering, is there any formal process or procedure if we want to become affiliate faculty member with the CPL? And possibly this can increase our feasibility and network with other scholars working on the same project or data set.
Yeah, great question, Yuling. Definitely reach out to us. Just send me an email about that. We don't have a formal process for the affiliates, sort of who we put on the website. It usually is folks who are doing a hosted project with us or otherwise sort of working with us in some way, but we're not always good about putting everyone up there. So if you have a hosted project with us already, you should definitely just reach out to us and we can facilitate that.
Thank you.
Yeah, being I guess I should also mention, being a CPL affiliate, for those who aren't affiliates, you don't have to be one in order to access any of the resources we just talked about. So it doesn't provide any special bundle of benefits. Philip, I saw you had your hand raised. Do you have a question?
Yeah, and I hope you guys can hear me. My microphone's been a little off today. So I noticed you guys talked a lot about like labor data sets mostly. Do you have any history working with maybe more public finance oriented data sets, like things like municipal corporations or state and local finance, or even like utilities like PG&E that are publicly regulated, or things with the PUC board?
Yeah, I can answer that. So our focus has generally been on government held data sets that we do, like the UCCCP is an example of a privately held data set that we've used to we've brought it on in large part to supplement some of the public held data sets through linkages. So some of what you mentioned, I would imagine, would be a privately held data set, but the CPUC data, we actually, sort of energy and environment haven't tended to be one of our 6 areas that we have a lot of hosted projects in that area. One of our hosted projects has recently established a linkage between the public utility commission data on just energy usage bills, utility bills, and has linked that together with the Department of Social Services data and also with the UCCCP credit data, and potentially also with a data set of housing prices. So that linkage is still ongoing and will probably take another 6 months, but at the end of it, we might potentially have a very useful data set that we would hope to be able to make available to future projects that would link CPUC data with those other data sets. And we've been in conversation with CPUC folks about setting up sort of a longer term data partnership. So I guess all of which is to say, sort of, and hopefully, but nothing sort of bird in hand right now, if that makes sense. But with any partnership that you're interested in, that you think other people would be interested in, this is for everybody, not just you, Philip, that reach out to us to see if we have, we aren't going to be interested in everything, because we have a good sense of what people have been sort of asking for. But CPUC data is one of those data sets that people are constantly asking for. And this project I just mentioned was sort of a good way of us getting acquainted with them. And so I think there might be other agencies that we feel similar about. So feel free to just reach out. Zora?
Yeah, my question was sort of similar, related to that, in terms of like trying to get data that hasn't been discussed yet. So I'm interested in like public or housing policy data. So from, local public housing agencies or even the HUD. So what is the best contact email to contact regarding this?
I don't know what email address we would point you to for that, but you can reach out to me if you want. Evan B. White at berkeley.edu. If it's sort of HUD and housing related, I think Joanna is another good person, joanna.lako@berkeley.edu. But we'll route you, if you send it to anyone on staff, we'll route you to the right place.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Need one bit of clarification just to kind of help people understand what is our kind of sweet spot of our scope. We've mostly focused on state and local data in California. There are a few cases where we are working with federal data, like the CMS data that Evan mentioned, but for the most part, we don't have a lot of agreements in place to access federal data. That doesn't mean we're not happy to talk about possibilities, but that's kind of where we focus thus far.
And I mentioned one other thing, which is we're also very focused on what you might think of as closed data, like data that aren't publicly available, which certainly HUD has some of that, but HUD also has a lot of open data that, we wouldn't be helping people sort of facilitate access to any sort of open data sets.
I'll take this brief pause to mention that CPL is hiring right now for a development director, and we'd love your help sharing information about the opening and through your networks so we can bring on someone who can help us continue to facilitate this work.
I'm going to respond live to a question in the chat from Caitlin about vital statistics. So we do not have vital statistics from the entire country. We do. So California Department of Public Health has an open process for applying for vital statistics, which is birth and death records. And generally, we'll just refer people to that process. However, there have been a couple of projects that we've helped facilitate where those data are being linked to other data sets using the hash linkage process. And we've had a little bit of trouble from CDPH sort of getting those projects approved, but we're hopeful that we'll be able to do that on a more consistent basis going forward. So like linking birth and death records up with, some other data set that we have access to. So, but no, we've never worked with the sort of US level vital stats data thus far, at least. Any last questions before we break? I want to thank everyone for joining us. And thank you to Nita and all of the presenters at CPL for putting this together. And definitely reach out to us if you have any questions. We'd love to be able to work with you guys.